G'day, thanks all. Thanks for joining us, and thanks mainly to Andrew Thompson or Tomo and Amy Lockwood and Darren Gordon when we get him here. For sharing their wisdom. I'll chip in with some light humour maybe, but that's about all I can contribute. But it's not. It's an opportunity for people to ask questions. Really, we're obviously around. Well, we've got people in from all over the place, and some including New Zealand through to WA, through to South Australia, Victoria. So quite a range of situations. And I guess tonight we wanted just to give people the opportunity to have a yarn about nutrition this time of year and some sort of things that people are seeing. So we've obviously got the gurus here to answer your questions and can shoot from the hip with some thoughts. But are there any? I'll just throw it straight to questions, I'll start asking them if nobody else does. But you just have to unmute your microphone and shout them out, or type them in if that's your preferred option. Welcome, Kat. You got here, mate.
Thank you, Mark. I did manage to get here.
Righto.
Any questions popping up, mate?
No, none yet. So I'll start throwing them at you. We might start with you, Kat. So I guess you're on the coalface there in Western Victoria. Sort of what have been, I guess, an atypical season in terms of no roughage around at all. It's been bare for a long time. But what are the things that are stressing or challenging you at the moment in terms of getting nutrition into use?
Cost after 12 months of not much income and a lot of costs. Like we're into 18 months of reasonably dry now, so water's going to be a major issue. Like if you're relying on dam water, I reckon there's going to be some real issues. We've already done some water testing on a few places where dams have got low, temperature's gone up, and there's a lot of bacteria happening there. So even while we're trying to feed sheep, it wasn't working. So they're losing weight. We're giving them 10 or 11 ME a day. So if you're having trouble, look at your water. We've even had trouble stuffing coming out of dams into troughs or through a header tank and through the troughs, still collecting E. coli and affecting growth rates, or even losing condition score pretty quickly. So roughage, we've probably fed a lot more straw this year combined with grain. Straw's testing 4 to 5 ME, so have a look at the NDF, which is your neutral detergent fibre, keeping an eye on that. And being a lot of the time being able to use straw at $150 a tonne is 40-50% of the ration. Once again, it's only for maintaining adult use. It's certainly not going to do anything for if you want to grow stuff, but it's probably dropped the cost of rations back by about 7 or 8 cents per kilo of feed, which, after last year on top of this year is making a big difference.
Just expand on that. So that bacteria count story. So sheep being fed everything they needed, but still losing weight. And so a bit of a last ditch attempt to try and work out what's going on, test the waters, but then found massive bacteria count.
Yeah, massive bacteria. Yep. Even more so with dams are out in the open and sheep have been camping near them. So all the urine and faeces going into the water really having an impact because it's down so low and we've had such a hot year that, shallow dams are a great petri dish for bacteria, isn't it? So I've been using the services of Larry in at Hamilton, who does a really cheap and effective water testing methodology. So he looks at E. coli, chloroforms, and what he terms other bacteria, and all those have an upper limit. And when you hit those upper limits, your intake goes to the shit, and you actually start losing stock. We had placed down the other side of Streatham start to lose stock. So I've had to put chlorine pumps on header tanks, and it seems to be doing the job. Yeah, and it's not that dear. It's about $450 for the header tank. That on the header tank, you just put the chlorine pump, and it just adds water as it goes through the system. So, as usual, when farmers are in a bit of trouble, they get fairly resourceful in finding things out.
Excellent. I guess one of the other things we wanted to cover off is any questions yet before we keep rattling on. But
Ferg, or just Kat, where do you go to get it tested and what's it cost?
It's tested in Hamilton and it's under $200 for the test, mate. Larry, what's his surname, Ferg? Larry, have a look at my phone.
Larry Walker.
That's it. Good work, Matt. I knew you'd know. Yeah, Larry Walker, he's a ripper. He's a true scientist. I reckon if you look in the Oxford Dictionary, there's a photo of a scientist, Larry's head would pop up. He's just very efficient, does a really good job.
I had a fair bit to do with Larry last year. I had dams getting low and relying on that sort of water, and with heaps of ducks in the dam and fouling them up, and blue-green algae and E. coli. They had the whole works. Yeah,
had the whole works. Yeah. Did you?
Anyway,
what was the other
scum the dams out last year. I'm relying heavily on bore water this year, so a bit of a different sort of angle on the things.
Well, speaking of water, Ferg, remember that paper Sophie found? Well, Sophie, you'd get answer this question out of South America somewhere about quality of water and growth rate in cattle. Like it dropped. What is it? Dropped a third or something from dam water through to bore water and pipe water, wasn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, it's been a while. But yeah, I think it was the weight gain on the clean water. I think that was the big one, wasn't it? 15% or something.
Yeah, it's 30% if I remember the paper. So pretty big. Yeah, so it's going to affect cattle. I'd say it's going to affect sheep. So Matt, was you, apart from your chloroforms and blue-green algae, did you have the count on your what he calls other bacteria? Did he have a count on that?
Yeah, so E. coli was through the roof. There were thousands and thousands of them. And I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it was big. It was pretty ugly.
Yeah, we had a place with other bacteria, over 1 million.
Sorry, I don't know what's going on there. I missed that, Cat.
The other bacteria was the count was over 1 million. So Larry said once it gets over 1 million, you can't actually physically count it. So he said it could have been twice that. But yeah, that's why the sheep weren't doing very good.
Yeah.
What did you do, Matt?
So I used the tank system I had, and I'd pump up water and treat it with chlorine. So every sort of couple of days, I was pumping water up and treating it and giving it a bit of a mix. And that tank was sort of live all the time. So I wasn't like the best system, I think, is to have a separate tank and pump it full. And while you're pumping it, put some chlorine in it and then let it sit for a day or two, and then sort of run that into another tank that then feeds them. But yeah, I didn't have enough tanks and didn't have enough time to muck around with it. So, but it certainly made a difference. I'm actually running mine on bore water this year, which last year I was too scared to use because the salt levels were too high. And I've sort of done a fair bit of research, I guess, on that. And that's some of the reason I wanted to come on the show and chat with you about it. Is that so my water's something like about 7.5 to 8 SU, I think it is, for sodium or salt. It's got calcium in it. It's got a bit of other gear in it. But the stock, from what I've learnt about it, most of the production loss, early production loss on salt, is because the animals love drinking it. Therefore, they eat less food. So it's not actually doing anything bad for them, which is what I was originally thinking, that, my sheep are getting sick and they're not growing as fast or whatever, or I'm going to make them sick on salt. But it's actually that they like it so much that they eat less. But this year I'm on bore water in a feedlot with the lambs, and of course they're on ad lib barley and beans, and they're smashing it. Like they're always fat and happy. They never sulk on water. They never, the guys talk about having a dusty film on top of the water and the lambs won't drink and all this sort of stuff. That doesn't happen. They just love it. So I don't know whether it's sort of, I'm viewing it now like it's medicated water. It's sort of better than other water. So I've spent years being sort of frightened to use it at a high level, and now that I'm forced to use it, I'm actually thinking it's going really well. Yeah,
I assume it's a bit of a middle ground somewhere. You can cook it the other way. Someone from WA.
Yeah, I'm sure you can overdo it. But I've found a bit of a lucky spot, I guess.
There, right.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that chlorine header tank, surely that's a tax deductible swimming pool. That's got to be.
It only costs about $450, so you might have to tell a few furfies on that one.
Right. Yeah.
One thing you can't do, you can't put straight chlorine into dams.
No,
You've got to
you
use
can't.
a tank system. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Interesting. Thanks, Matt.
So what are you feeding at the moment, Matt?
Sorry?
What are you feeding at the moment? What's your ration?
Predominantly a lentils barley mix at about 20% lentils and then barley.
So that's your adult stock or growing stock?
That's everything. I'm just getting the one mix. And so adult stock are getting about 3.5 kilos a week, and young stock are getting about 5.5 kilos a week. They seem to be going well. They've all got available sort of straw. The young ewes have got a bit of hay, pasture hay, just in rings that they're working on.
Yep. How much straw do you reckon they're eating? No? Because they're getting about 6 ME out of 500 grams a day. So your sheep, what are they, about a 60 kilo standard reference weight?
Yeah, something like that, yep.
Yeah, so they're about a bit over 10 ME a day to maintain condition. So they're obviously getting a bit out of the straw.
Yep. They're not, so the adult ewes, they've only just started getting the straw. They've actually been on a lease block just cleaning up a bit of, well, they've actually been eating a lot of Scotch thistles. They've been stripping the leaves and flower heads off them pretty well. But yeah, they've been going pretty well. And they're just coming up to mating. So I'm just sort of brought them home and starting to feed them a bit of straw and a bit more grain.
One for the vets here. Vitamin A, vitamin E. We haven't seen green feed for a fair while now. When are we going to start to run into some limitations with those two beauties?
I think Amy was gearing up to answer that question, but I'm not.
I don't know if I'm a vet, but I'll attempt. So vitamin A, particularly in young stock, sort of 6 weeks after the grain feed disappears, they'll start running into their own reserves, which don't last too long. So particularly if you're lambing later, those young lambs aren't going to have a lot of time to build up a lot of vitamin E reserves themselves. And so particularly now we've had sort of close to 6 months of dry in the west, and it sounds like there's been pretty dry elsewhere. So yeah, supplementing with vitamin E is definitely one to be thinking about until we get some green feed on the ground.
What is it
obviously
like when it goes bad, vitamin E?
Sorry, what was that, Ferg?
Oh, what does it look like when they're deficient?
So vitamin E, as important, vitamin E and selenium both work together for antioxidant roles. And so most commonly it's seen as white muscle disease. So they get that sort of, weakness and trembling. So white muscle disease, particularly in WA, would be the most common manifestation of vitamin E and or selenium deficiency. Selenium deficiencies are more common sort of in winter, spring, when you've got lush green feed that's rapidly growing and the selenium's diluting out of that. So there's a bit of interchange. Bit of selenium can counteract a vitamin E deficiency, but particularly if you get a deficiency of both, that's where you're going to really run into issues.
What's vitamin A look like when we start to see issues with that?
Vitamin A is probably not my area of expertise, but vitamin A is a fat-soluble ADK, same as E, so it will be soluble. But yes, I think vitamin A from memory is also from green feed, so similar sort of story with that one.
And what's the trick there? Do you inject them with it, or can you just tip it on their feed and they can get enough like that, or what's the go?
So vitamin E, because it's an antioxidant, it's very unstable with UV. So the most efficient way of supplementing with vitamin E would be either a drench, which you need to sort of do 4 to 6 weekly until there's green feed available, or you can give them an injection. There's I think it's ADK, vitamin A, E, and something else is available as an injection. You can put it on their feed, but you just need to be careful about that vitamin E breaking down pretty quickly when it's unstable when exposed to sunlight.
David Rendell always used to say the vaccinations only last 2 or 3 days, so he said you're far off. I'm quoting David here, far off giving them the drench, were his words.
So the drench is best?
2004-5, there was a fair bit of 5-6, I should say. We had a fair few issues in the area So he said drench. He said the vaccinations weren't giving long enough, so he said drench.
Yep. And when you say it's sort of fairly unstable in sunlight, is that like 10 minutes or is it more like 2 days? Like if I was to tip some into the hopper as the auger's augering the barley up into the feed wagon, it's going to be mixed with the barley and then it's going to be eaten within, I'd say within 45 minutes, it'll be inside a sheep. Is that stable enough, long enough?
I know that's certainly what a lot of people do is tip it on the feed. And yeah, I mean, if you're eating it within 45 minutes, you'd think it'd be fairly okay, given you're probably going to take 45 minutes to drench a mob anyway. But yeah, as quickly as possible, basically, if you can get it out of sunlight. Out of direct exposure to sunlight anyway would be the best option.
Yep.
That's good. Right, Amy?
Sorry.
What's your dose rate when you're drenching them?
I think Wiener's was about 5 mils of vitamin E from memory. And I think you use it fairly...
So it's a gram or something, so it's not much to...
Yeah.
It's on barley.
Yeah. Yeah, so drenching it, you're typically best mixing it with water because it is, the vitamin E is a really thick sort of oily, sticky texture. So if you mix it with a bit of water, it's a lot easier to drench them, whereas if you're sticking it on feed, you're probably going to put it on straight.
Yep.
So my question for you, because I see you sitting there comfortable, where in this part of the world, so in NZ, we've got people going into mating or some people will be still 6 weeks away, and there's chat about flushing ewes, and if you haven't got grain feed, that's a grain cart to flush ewes. The economics of feeding sheep up for scanning rather than feeding them up once you know who's pregnant with twins or with multiples.
So a couple of things, Ferg. Are you talking about the classic lupin flushing but without lupins, or are you talking about sort of rising plain?
Rising plain with barley, yeah, with expensive, so $500 a barley.
As you know, we've never been able to, the original work done in the 70s in New Zealand, sort of said that, for every kilo gain over the 6 weeks prior to conception, really, that scanning performance could increase by 5%. So that's massive, right? And we haven't been able to duplicate that over the journey. In all the work that we've done, I guess we've never been able to show that, I guess, additional effect of rising plain as opposed to just their where they get to when the ram hits them. But I think if you've even looked at, the cost of gaining a kilo, what are supplements worth? Did you say, Kat, 400 or something? Muted, mate, but.
Sorry.
You're on mute, Kat.
Again, Kat. But let's say I think they're like 400 over here. Maybe you can do it cheaper, but and let's say 10 to 1. Okay, it's a pretty expensive exercise. So if it's costing you, a couple of dollars per ewe to gain that weight, as opposed to not lose it, right? So because you're trying, that's the whole idea, is to gain weight. It might be costing you $300 to $400 per 100 ewes in your mob. Okay, i.e. expensive. You've got to get a lot of lambs back for that. Again, if you do increase scanning performance by 5%, I guess what we often forget is that only translates into a couple of extra lambs weaned, right? Because you've got 5 single ewes there, and you're going to get 4.5 lambs out of them at 90% survival, right? You got 5 twin ewes there, and you get 70% survival. You're only getting an extra couple of lambs back. In other words, those lambs have got to be worth a whole lot of money even to get your money back. Is that clear? So I think the rising plain and the flushing with lupins as separate, obviously not a Kiwi option. They are both relatively expensive exercises. I think a lot of people do them. Certainly flushing in our neck of the woods. It is a insurance policy to some extent. Again, with flushing with lupins, for example, the average response is about 10%. If you look across the literature, plus or minus 10. Okay. In other words, sometimes it's 20 and often it's 0. Okay. But people will do it because it works for them.
Thanks, mate. And then, so I guess if we contrast that, so I'm often talking to people that might only buy 15 tonne of barley for the year, and I'm trying to talk them into keeping the 15 tonne for once the preg scan has been, and then feed them into a multiple bearing ewe to maintain her condition or lift her a bit, and there's a lot more money in that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess condition score at lambing has always been the key target. And I mean, I think I guess there's a couple of little calculations you can go through yourself. But if we look at twin survival, I mean, generally we talk about, again, it varies for different people. We've all got different sheep. But in the maternals work, and Matt was obviously involved in that way back then, Matt, you're talking about 10, per condition score, okay, to keep it simple. We're talking about a 10% improvement in survival in maternal ewes, per condition score. For merinos, on average, we're talking about a 20% increase in survival per condition score, righto? So I guess whether you put the supplement in to ideally reduce live weight loss, let's say under tough conditions, I guess you can do the sums yourself. If you can avoid the ewes losing a third of a condition score, you might pick up 6% marking from your maternals, and you might pick up whatever it is, double that in your merinos, okay? And then you can do the sums as to whether that's worth the exercise. And inevitably the answer will be it's a better investment to put your $5 or $10 or whatever you got to do into late pregnancy than prior to joining. I mean, it almost always works that way, and I guess that's why we've said, you almost take what you can get for joining. Seasonally, dictates your condition score, and then save your pennies and put it into the ewes in late pregnancy.
Thanks, mate. How are we going for questions now?
Would that vary, that answer, Tomo? If you're a late lammer, we could scan 170% compared to, say, scanning 120%. Would the thought process be different there? Because you're going to have so many twins, you can invest into them a bit earlier because you've got a fertile flock, so stop that bit of weight loss gain in early pregnancy?
I guess so, Kat. I think what you're saying is that, so if you're saying you lamb late, therefore you're going to gain weight in late pregnancy off green feed, is that what you're getting at? Yeah. Therefore you don't need it then?
Yeah, but also if you've got a highly fecund flock and you're going to have 65, 70% twins, is it worth keeping the feeding going, knowing that you're going to have to do something with your twins anyway instead of letting them lose some weight during early pregnancy?
I'm not too sure I can answer it, but I guess the point is that you're 70% twins. So what's that? What are you scanning at? 180 or something?
Yeah, 165, 170. So 5% dries. Yes, something like that.
I think again, Youngie's work would probably suggest you're pretty close to the sweet spot anyway. In terms of there's probably not a lot of incentive to go much further. You're probably a little bit beyond it for merinos, and you're probably getting towards it for maternals. Certainly that's the case based on average survival rates for twins and triples. The case just the business case just rolls over. You're gone too far. So in that case, you're not worth spending a cent. Trying to get more fetuses, and I think what you're alluding to, maybe you don't even need that supplement in late pregnancy either.
Mm.
Just for clarity, some of that's because you're basically turning a single into a triplet every percent you go up, aren't you? Or twins into
What's that?
Just for clarity, as the reason there's a sweet spot is because you're just creating more. Every new lamb is a triplet essentially over that 175.
Yeah, correct. I mean, the average survival of triplets in that all that work we did was 55 to 60, and in that case, if that's the sort of survival you're getting, 180 out of your triples or weaning out of your triples, there's just no point creating extra ones, so that's why that's sort of rolling over at that 170 to 190 sort of thing, depending on the system. Kat, are you seeing something different, I guess, in the real world, or?
The real world, there's no feed. It's just I've been thinking about it of late. Like, there's some pretty fertile flocks around that lamb in, say, July, August, and traditionally we just let them, get them pregnant and do the typical thing, let them lose weight and put it back on. But if you got sick, so just whatever they scan at, but we know they scan high historically. Do we, instead of letting them slip? And maybe this is a fear factor from last year too. Do we keep the ration solid all the way till we do get some green feed? Whether that may be because we've got so many twins in the system.
I think we're kind of talking slightly different things. I was still talking about 3 rams going in, whereas you're talking about sort of that once you've when that fairly we typically cook. We should be able to let them drop, but there's risk.
Kat, I mean, I guess the old rule of thumb with certainly with merinos was that, I think the refined condition score targets are, 3.3, 3.4, something like that for twins and triples. And I guess the idea is to, if you can't gain weight in late pregnancy or condition in late pregnancy, never lose it in the first place. Sort of lamb where you join, ideally. Whereas a lot of our maternal flocks have been joined, much, much fatter. And so I guess they can lose more. Their targets are pretty similar for where they should be at lambing time, but they, coming from a much higher starting point.
I think you hit around here last year. A lot of those early lambing guys got quite a awakening. If they had let their ewes slip a bit in that later part of autumn, it was pretty brutal through June and July here, trying to plan around feeding animals that were lambing. A lot of guys had never done that before. It was pretty tough on a few fellas.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
And the guys who did have extra weight on their ewes were pretty comfortable with the fact that they did.
Kat, are we running into you seeing any calcium problems or not yet, maybe, but things have been a lot longer than they would normally.
Yeah, we've probably got pretty good at that one, unfortunately. We sort of know that we have to put some stuff in, whether it's a block or, put it straight through the auger through the grain. Bit unfortunate, you're good at managing these dry times. You're nice to be managing something a bit wetter at the moment. So, no, I haven't seen it at the moment, but we could be a biased subsample too, because the blokes we work with just do it, Ferg. So Matt might know a bit more outside, but yeah, I haven't seen any this year, and I would have expected to see it now. Like, we're into our third, some places nearly 4 months of feeding now. It'd be interesting in South Australia because it got dry in the spring last year and they haven't had anything since. Like, they've probably been on 5 months dry feed now in South Australia. So is anyone in South Australia on call tonight?
I think sadly they've had 1 month of grain feed and about 2 years of dry feed, haven't they? I think it's been pretty tough. James will, but I'm not sure if anyone else from SA. But that's where you. So, what's your standard calcium game?
I just go 1/3 cause mag, 1/3 lime, 1/3 salt in a loose lick. Like, you can do that for about a quarter of the price of buying the blocks. But if you want ease, the blocks are bloody simple, mate. They'll eat a lot early because of the salt. Then you think, geez, I'm going to spend thousands of bucks on this, and they sort of moderate their intake a bit after they get used to having it.
So on that one, Kat, given that I've already got a fair bit of salt in my salt water, I should be restricting salt as much as I can. I've fed a lot of salt licks last year. I'm not feeding any this year, and I haven't got into trouble yet. But I'm aware of the fact that I will. Is there any other way of getting them to eat it without the salt? If they need it, will they eat it, or are they only eating it because the salt's in with it?
Well, we've tried it before. We have quite a bit of salt early to attract them, and we do dilute it back because that's one of the more expensive parts of the mix. And I'm going to say with varying degrees of success, Matt. Some it's worked and some hasn't. So Won't put my head on either of those.
Yep.
Is it different salt, Amy?
I'm not entirely sure as far as where it's just in your limestone or your loose mix. But yeah, they're mostly sodium chloride, I imagine, in your salt water. There'd be a few other minerals in there, magnesium probably, potassium, but yeah. No, we are, yeah, I mean, we have seen a little bit of what appears to be calcium deficiency over here with long-term stubble and grain. You're just starting to see a few symptoms. So we've just chucked out some limestone mixed in with the barley at 2%. I think the other thing to think about is phosphorus, because of the balance between calcium and phosphorus in the diet and how they mobilise calcium to counteract that need. So yeah, just making sure that they've got enough calcium in the diet, particularly when they're on stubbles and pastures that are dry.
So when you say it's mixed in with the barley, so that's just through the auger and then sort of out in the trail, or is it in a dish? Or
yeah, No, that's just straight up the auger and then out in the trail.
It's going to be tricky for me tipping lime in as well as tipping vitamin E and A and everything in the auger. Is it all happening?
Yeah, that did your Breaking Bad stuff out, mate.
Yeah, I reckon you'll sort it out, mate. Good.
Have to get the fingers out of the way, or I'll get them chopped off.
So, going back to a bit of your research at the moment, Tomo, with the extra, the whole body fat reserves thing, where's that sitting as far as, you had the old genotype versus one with the higher fat? Where would that be sitting us now?
In terms of what, Kat?
Condition on sheep. So we had a half a spring, so they would have been above, put some weight down. If we had higher fat reserves in our system, what would that have genetically, with the work you're doing at the moment? Where would that put us?
I guess the work that we're doing, Kat, is really around trying to value that fatness. And what's it mean in a breeding objective? More, I guess obviously those animals that were fatter to start with are still going to be fatter. I mean, that's the whole argument. They can use fat off their back, and therefore, which is more energy dense, and therefore they lose less weight. But the big advantage of being fatter in the modelling that Youngie's doing is that it should enable animals to eat the lower quality feed. Okay, because they can use that energy off their back. Okay, they can basically essentially stay in paddocks for longer and consume less digestible feed. That's where the major benefit is coming from. Genetically fatter sheep.
So what kind of digestibility we can talking about there, Tom? What, down to 45s and 40 and still doing pretty good, or?
Oh, I don't have those sort of details, Kat.
There's a research project for you.
We've written that one a few times.
So from the breeding objective point of view, Ferg, we'll go over to you. Where should we be looking? If we're going to use more, if we can, as Tomo said, use more lowly digestible food. So where does that put fat as far as me doing a breeding objective for someone? How far up the scale should we put it now?
Yeah, it's a good question, and and the best scientific answer is it depends. But I guess we're trying to work out where it is. I mean, I get asked all the time, like, where's the cutoff, and we haven't seen it yet. I thought we would see it biologically, that we just got them inefficient or whatever. But I think this work is showing that there's dollars in it, but the important thing, as I think Tomo probably just said, is that you don't get those dollars unless you run the stocking rate to get those dollars. Like, you can just having fat sheep and running them at low stocking rate doesn't make you any money. And so it's about, and if you're a conservative stocker or you're in South Australia or light country or places where you can't physically run high stocking rates, then the ability to extract the value out of that sort of whole body energy is less. But if you're in in a place where you can run high stocking rates, and I think there's other benefits in addition to that straight stocking rate. I think, like here we see it's the winter which does the damage. You've got a 100-day winter, so just if you've got a fat sheep going into winter, you've got places you can put her. If she's skinny, you're limited with your options. I think the same you're kind of talking about there in autumn now, where if she's skinny, you have to keep feeding her because otherwise you're into a welfare issue, and so it is. Yeah, there is a bit of horses for courses, but it's certainly up. Yeah, I mean it's within balance of all the other traits, but it's up in our top. It's always there or thereabouts. We're looking pretty heavily at probably the condition score breeding values in both cattle and sheep now, as much as straight fat as well. Probably a bit of way to go there in terms of getting more data in, but I guess at the end of the day, that's what we're really, really wanting. We can't, but Tomo's work and has shown that fat breeding value in sheep is a good indicator of whole body energy, and therefore worth having. I guess when we went into that project, we were kind of half had in our minds that we might have a new kind of whole body energy breeding value or something, or a new measure that we had to select for. But I think what that work has shown that with the stuff that we've got now, we can kind of we can use condition score plus the fat breeding value. Henry's, who's online's been heavily looking at the hogget fat breeding value. That seems to maybe be better linked than the yearling traits, which is interesting because no one measures it, but it seems to be whatever's going on in the algorithm, that seems to be a nice predictor of kind of sheep that, I guess, the good doers or whatever we want to call them. But it's still there, still part of a balanced breeding objective, and I think if your ability to run stocking rate or how hard you can run those sheep will depend on what it's worth to you. But I guess we've got it sitting in most of our indexes are probably running it with about 17, 18 other traits at the moment, so it's certainly not out there on its own, but it's definitely in there.
On that one, Mark, is it weeding out? So, like we've got in a lot of our indexes, we've got a bit of a twist to keep mature weight low. Some sheep are achieving that by being sort of mature, skinny sheep, and you get other sheep that are mature, just little whales of things. So they're weighing more. Is the index balancing up that fact that one's in condition score 4 and the other one's in condition score 2.7?
No. Well, the short answer is no, and the long answer is it needs to. So I think we've been having this. I can't remember. Some of us on the line anyway have been chatting about the Angus, some of the Angus correlations, just looking at mature cow weight, but the same thing in adult weight. We need to, and I guess what we're actually trying to breed for is standard reference weight, rather than, and so weight at condition score 3 as an adult sheep is what we want.
Yes.
And obviously those fat ones, if we corrected them back to their condition score 3, then they would be quite a light sheep. Whereas those skinny ones, if we corrected them up to condition score 3, they'd be quite a heavy sheep. I think somehow, whether that's it, and I guess that's what we're trying to do when we do put a negative weighting on adult weight, but we've also got a strong positive sort of on condition score and fat and muscle to try and essentially breed those sheep that are a lighter standard reference weight. And I think we're probably having some success around that. And certainly in some of our commercial flocks that have been measuring for a long time, we have reduced standard reference weight, but not shifted weight as much as we have standard reference weight. So, I think we need to be really careful with selection against adult weight. If we just do it, we end up with those pooled hills essentially, because that's probably the easiest thing to achieve.
A fast-growing young sheep that then, as an adult, is just a big, skinny sort of animal. That's going to achieve it straight up.
Yeah, and I think that's what we've probably. Yeah, and I can't remember the Angus correlations off the top of my head, but they were enough to scare me a bit in terms of, we've got to be really careful in those breeds not to be selecting for mature cow weight without being really, because we are just getting skinny cows if we're not really careful.
So that's even if you're combining muscle and fat in the breeding objective, mate. Still getting that?
No, I think that's what I think a balanced objective is probably getting away with it, but we do need, we need firmer measures around that. I think like we're doing our guesstimates, but and I think some of the work that is coming out of Ty's work and that will help us maybe put some more dollar values around it. But I'd love to see what a standard reference weight breeding value looks like. But
so I have a question. It's more of a basic question. As the people that be watching this back on YouTube, going back to sheep nutrition and late autumn and summer, I was just wondering, Darren, would you be able to talk sort of through if someone was in the situation, more so maybe in New Zealand, but they know that their sheep in early pregnancy are coming up to mating, or your feed isn't right, what the testing and the benefits of the testing and stuff you can do?
So good question, Soph. So the first thing you do, if you've still got dry food in your paste, get a digestibility test on that and see where that is, because that's food or quantity of feed by digestibility gives you intake. So if you know those two things, you can have a pretty close guesstimate how much they're getting out of the pasture, then whatever you feed after that. So if you're 3 or 4 ME short, have a look at what you can, have as a supplement, whether it's you got either haylage or silage or your grains. Just measure those, and you can do a pretty accurate feed budget pretty quickly, actually. But getting your past digestibility, if you've got a lot of dry feed and want to use, that's pretty important. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Have you got testing labs over there, Ferg, for digestibility?
Yeah, we've got electricity and everything, mate.
Oh, that's new. Well, I suppose my better question is, do they use it, mate? Do many people do?
Not as much as they shouldn't be for sheep, for sure. Like, the dairy game would be all over it, but sheep and beef would be, the answer is definitely not enough. But the same availability of testing here, but a lot of people kind of making silage or baleage or whatever, and then guessing what is in it. And because grain is expensive normally, like the biggest fodder fed, or other than winter crops, like standing crops would be homemade sort of fodders, and yeah, we know that can be massive variation in dry matter and massive variation in ME and
NDF as well. So definitely worth testing. And I've looked at figures from this year. There's a 50% variation on the mean, nearly on all the major, dry matter, ME, protein, NDF. It's all over the place. Depending where you got rain or didn't get rain, on how well it tested up.
Yeah. And again, for the recording, just the NDF story, Kat, what the sort of numbers that people are going to be looking for. And
so NDF, neutral detergent fibre. So the higher that figure is, the higher percentage of fibre is in your diet. So the more fibre in the diet, the quicker your stomach gets full and takes longer for the body to break it down. So younger sheep, you're probably going to need below 45, at least 50 for NDF. And with older sheep, can get away, as I said, as a part ration, you get up to 65 to 75. We can still have it as part of our ration as long as it's tested up at 4 or 5 ME. But if it only tests at 1 or 2 ME, which I've seen a bit of this year out of late done crops, then they put the windrower through, then they baled in the last 5 to 6 weeks. So it's had a fair bit of weathering on it. It's only come back at 1 or 2 ME. Useless feed. So that's just the value of testing, like the old thing, oils ain't oil. So until you test it, you don't know what you're going to be feeding. But with your haylage over there, it should be just a Monty to be testing that, mate.
Yeah.
With the places they've got electricity, of course.
Bill, you were reaching for the microphone button there a minute ago.
I was zoned out. I have couple of questions. So I have some lucerne that I put my maidens on because we're about to join in a couple of weeks, and with some hay for the protein because I think it's high protein. So I just keep them on there until I run out of grass, and then give them some pellets because that's all I have is that lucerne, and then not much else. And I have a little bit of grain pick for the main mob I use, and I was saving it for joining, but then I recalled that it's actually about the point of joining more than during joining, so I've just put them on that, and then I'll feed when my grain turns up that I ordered 3 weeks ago. I will start feeding that. So that's all I can really do, and then I'll just take on board what you said about once you've done your scanning, and don't let them drop off. But I haven't used flushing or anything with the Lucerne before, but I thought I'd try it this year, so hopefully it comes to fruition.
So you've got plenty of green leaf on your Lucerne. The Lucerne leaf's 75-80% digestible, but the stalk's only about 40 or 45%. So even though it's green, the stalk, it's all about the leaf. So when you lose your leaf matter, the production goes straight down like that. So it's just good old-fashioned observational skills. So if you've still got leaf, you're tipping along pretty well. Once you start to lose the leaf, you're going to need something else pretty quickly.
Yeah, I've got a haylage and Lucerne hay, but I thought I would just go straight onto like a pellet or something, because then I know what's in it. I mean, because I don't have enough. I don't feel like I have enough volume of either of the other things to bother with.
So no doubt
testing it, which seems to get rain.
You've got them tested, no doubt, Jill.
Well, I don't have the volume to be bothered with it, to be honest. Like I don't have a huge amount of it, so I thought I'll just feed it and then do the pellets, because I've got also to weigh up whether I feed it to my weaner heifers. I think I'd rather feed it to them. Like I'll test it for them rather than the sheep. It's easier. I think I don't know when it comes to costing of who gets it and who's worth more. And what I guess you feed less to sheep than you would cows of the grainy sort of stuff. So that's where I was with that, rightly or wrongly.
Have you got much dry feed left after your Lucerne paddocks down?
No. No, it's pretty bare, really, around the place. Like I've kept some for the cattle, but the sheep, they've worked their way around, and now I'm up to sacrifice paddocks, I think.
So your sheep are about a 60 kilo standard reference weight, if I imagine. So,
yeah.
Yep, 9.5 ME a day, less 10% because they're in containment. So probably get away with 8.5 ME a day.
Right.
But what I would do, I'd break them into the pens on condition score. So have your heavy ones in some pens and your lighter ones in other pens. And when you scan, I know this is work, but split your twins and singles and feed them accordingly.
100%, yeah.
Yep, cool. Because I'd imagine the pellet's going to be, what, $5.50 a tonne? 500, $5.50 a tonne?
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Yep. Are they giving you specs on that?
Tricky. They give us some specs, yep. I haven't got them yet because they haven't arrived. But I think that's the thing. So for joining, just leave them all together, and then I just have to wait till scanning and keep them going till they're ticking over.
Yep.
Would you be better off? Feeding while they're on their Lucerne, feeding them as much of everything else as you can to stretch the Lucerne for as long as you can. The other thing with going on to, we did this with the Evergrades, Tomo, where they go on to Lucerne and they seem to get a gutful and then sulk for 3 or 4 days, and it sort of takes them a week or two to get their body adjusted to eating it, and then they run out and they're on to something different. So the longer you can sort of stretch it and sort of bridge with different feeds, I guess, so that they don't go radically from one feed to a different feed, and then that runs out and they're on a different feed. That could knock them around more. Like you give them good stuff, but you give them different good stuff every week, and then they just don't do anything with it. Is that a fair point?
Yeah, that's the thing. They did sulk. Yeah, because they went from dry feed onto the Lucerne and they pretty much sat in the corner for the first while. So then I made sure I put hay and everything in there, and they're ticking along now. But that's what I thought, if I keep them going on that. And I didn't know whether to feed, like I've got feeders versus trail feeding, because there's only 200 or something in that mob. Do I start that so that they've got a choice, but then they'll have too much protein, so that's probably not worth it until later. Just use the haylage into ricks maybe, or the feeders.
So in a perfect world, Jill, before you put them onto the Lucerne, you would have started them on the hay in the dry feed paddock, so they have the hay for 2 weeks.
Yeah, I did that.
Then when they go into the Lucerne, they know what the haylage is and they'll eat that, so the adaptation is really good. It takes about 7 days to adapt from a change of feed. I've even seen it this year from barleys to wheat. You think, they've both got a fair bit of starch in them. They think, I run out of barley, so I start feeding wheat. And I said, and what happened? They said they start shitting themselves. So any change of feed, if you can stagger it, is a good thing. And back to your point there, Matt, before we tried, I remember on a place about 4 or 5 years ago, we said we'll try and stretch the feed out. It's like a 14-year-old kid when it goes into the fridge, it gets the chocky bar and doesn't eat the Brussels sprouts, so it'll always go for the better feed. So they left the hay there, and they ate all the lucerne, and then when they got hungry, they started getting into the hay after that.
The
good in theory,
Kiwis online will be saying put a fence up, and then they won't last.
Yeah, they would. Yeah.
I mean, that's what I mean. Here you would break fence. Well, that sort of fodder, they're not necessarily lucerne, but break fencing that off, and particularly back fencing with the lucerne. But there might be some Kiwis online that can talk more. But they do exactly that: stretch out feed by forcing them to eat the bits they want them to eat. But yeah, if you let them in there, they'll obviously eat all the lucerne. But
and the other thing, Tomo, you said like for 90% for single survival when you were doing your maths about the 5% gains. And then, so what's the standard for multiples? Like not the top 1%ers, like for survival for your multiples.
I got it here somewhere, Jill. So the industry average from that triples project we had was 88% for singles, 73% for twins, and 55 for triples.
And what about the next gen standards?
What's that? The top producers?
There's the industry standards, and then there's the next gen family standards.
I'm not sure what next gen's doing, but the top 10's doing 93 for singles, 88 for twins, and 70 for triples.
Okay. Yeah.
So I reckon they're pretty solid targets, I reckon.
Mm-hmm.
And just back to the lucerne question. I mean, I think that work in Victoria, Gervais Gaunt and Lyndon Kubel and so forth, and I'm sure you're aware of it, Jill. I'm sure they showed you only needed about 200 kilos of lucerne leaf or something like that to get a flushing response, and the response was exactly the same as feeding lupins. So on average, it was that plus 10%, varying from 0 to 20. And what they also found is there was no adverse effect of leaving them on the lucerne throughout joining. You know, there's been a lot of talk of excess protein and stuff. I mean, I think it's overdone. You know, and they compared 2 weeks on the lucerne from a week prior to a week post, the rams going in, versus just staying on the lucerne for the whole joining period, and there was no effect. In fact, if they stayed there for the whole joining, they were about plus 13%, something like that.
No,
in other words, you don't need a whole lot. You know, the discussion about trying to spread it out a little bit seems pretty sensible because you don't actually need a whole lot anyway.
Thank you.
It might have been part of the question you asked me, but did you, or maybe you said the other day, are people flushing with barley? Is that happening more and more? Is it or?
Well, they call it flushing, but it's a rising plane, I suppose. But it's feeding a lot of people feeding grain or doing something to bring sheep off the hill and do something as before the ram goes back in. But I guess the point of my question is to get it recorded that. Like it's that little often and rather than a lot late on like try and let them maintain or try and do something to maintain weight rather than lose it and then try and get it back because you can't afford to do that. And then often think that a lot of people here only have small silos and sort of fill them once a year. And so if you have got a limited resource in terms of the magic that's known as barley, then I think, using that to do something on a twin bearer is going to be more sense than try and do anything to get a few more lambs on board, because we've still got heaps of what's the merino answer, but there's a lot of high scanning, low weaning sort of flocks as a result of the big dips and the big shifts we see in condition score that need to be flattened out a bit here, I think. Well, I mean, there'll be both sides of the ditch, but definitely here. And I think it's, I mean, obviously here it's different. You sort of probably run out of feed in maybe Feb up high, and then so they've got a couple of months where they're looking at scenery and eating roughage, where they're losing weight. And so if you catch them at the right spot, you can still hit the ram in pretty good order. But yeah, I guess it's quite a different production system where they're using that barley, but I think the concept of putting weight back on with the grain cart to get conception just has never made sense to me.
Finish that, I think, again, thinking of places like South Australia, which are, well, at least from Port Augusta, where I was there in September or whatever, may be looking pretty ordinary. But in terms of condition score targets, obviously if people have let them slip already, I mean, I think that's fine given the circumstances. If because you whatever didn't have cash, whatever. I think the other thing to keep in mind is still trying to maintain that difference between singles and twins. Okay, even if you have let them drop below where we say they might be, I think the next best thing to do is still try to achieve that half a condition score or so difference between the singles and twins, even if that means 2.3 for your singles and 2.8 for your twins, whatever. But if you have early lambers, whatever, if you have let them slip already, I think you can still try to allocate what you have got to get that difference of around half a condition score is probably still a sensible thing to do.
And that's all because you're driving lamb birth weight essentially, or driving up twin lamb birth weight?
Yeah, it just comes down to the relative effect that you're going to have, the scope to change birth weight of twins versus singles, and therefore affect lamb survival. As we know, singles are reasonably robust. Part of certainly in merinos, part of the reason the condition score target for singles is higher than what you think is actually because of the impacts on lifetime wool production. Okay, but certainly from a pure lamb survival point of view, twins are, as you know, just on that slippery part of the curve. So that's therefore your investment's going to be so much better.
Perk, do people consider joining for like a shorter period when it's a tough season, like go to 4 weeks, or do they just keep it 5 regardless?
No, I think there's lots of people consider that for lots of different reasons, but you're to be much more efficient with your feeding and I guess working out who your non-performers are going to be earlier. And there is quite a few people that are either reducing joining down or even joining for one cycle with your maternal or your merino or whatever, and then going terminal as your second cycle, so that you haven't got those late born lambs that are going to drag their feet. You've got a terminal lamb that you can trade at weaning or whatever. So I think there's definitely options to try and tighten up when you're managing, because there's nothing worse than having you're lambing over obviously 5 weeks long enough, but if you're lambing over 6 or 7, then your ability to manage that scenario is much harder than you are over a short window. What are you saying, Kat?
Yeah, especially if you're lambing like late June, July, August, I reckon, and you're worried about things, you can probably get away with the one cycle, mate. Go 17, 21 days, somewhere in that range. We've had a few blokes do exactly what you talked about. Just go your maternals the early cycle, then anything else goes to the terminal, which I reckon is a great idea. What's the heritability of that, mate? Repeatability of first cycle versus second cycle in sheep?
Next question. There's a great paper I read about it, and I can't remember, but it was heritable. And I don't know, but we see here the scan, there's more twins in that first cycle as well. So there's the first cycle when a lot of scanners, well, not a lot, but some will talk about those different early, mids, and lates, and your kind of earlies are always 15-20% higher scanning than just more twins basically in those earlies. So I think, but there is a good paper that says it's heritable, and I just can't remember the heritability, but the sort of they're the sheep that we want, aren't they? The ones that hit the ram straight away. I guess it's probably embryo mortality and a few other things going on that must have the heritable component.
Because the cattle work certainly shows it, doesn't it? That if you go, breed from your heifers that go early, you'll pick up a calf over their lifetime, doesn't it? Is that the way it works?
Yeah, and part of that's genetics, and part of that's just straight phenotype. The fact that if they go early, then they can present for estrus again that early, and so you just roll that early outcome, and so it's not all genetics, but there's a combination there. But I think it's a good plan to have, Jill, as terms of battle plan with a tough season. But, I mean, those late lambs are going to be hard work anyway, and so either not creating or getting rid of those. If we're going to get rid of some ewes, you might as well get rid of the ones that didn't get pregnant early.
I think what lifetime, Tomo, what is it? 80% of your weaner mortality happens in your bottom 20% of your weaning live weights, which will be your late twins, most likely, wouldn't it?
Just to continue that, I mean, Darren, Amy, whatever, people are on the ground a bit more than me. I mean, for single cycle, I mean, we used to say 75% get pregnant. I'm thinking it's now 85 to 90. Is that obviously there's genotype differences and whatnot, but is that more commonplace? Because there's a lot of people that did go, a lot of people I know anyway, who went for 21 days, 24 days, and certainly scanning 160 plus in merinos, 96, 97, 98% pregnant, and so are you seeing enough people doing that for 15 to 20 days that are getting 95% pregnant?
I probably haven't got enough people game enough to do it yet, but if you're talking those figures, that's fairly motivating, that, mate. Yeah, if you can get that amount in that first cycle, as Ferg said, geez, it tightens up all your management structures and feeding structures.
I think we do, Tomo, with because most people put the ram out right on the perfect, like, short day breeders. We're putting the rams out April, May, like it's a sweet spot for reproduction. And so I think people who haven't, the good managers around, I suppose, that did 17 and 17, like you're trying to get some terminal lambs, but you don't get many because the merinos have got most of them by the time, like, they're getting 80, 85, 87 or whatever in that first cycle. So you have to screw it down even tighter than that to get a few terminal lambs if that was the part of the game. But so I think we are seeing the good managers get some pretty big numbers in that one cycle.
Would you put a caveat on it, say you've got to do it before? You can't go one cycle if you join in early January or December. You sort of got to be a late January, February onwards for one cycle.
There'll be a spot there. I don't know what the spot is, but there will be a spot. Yeah.
I'm only doing the 24 days and tagging lambs at birth. I do have a ram as a backup ram just in case I don't want to lose any good ewes, but there's just bugger all lambs in that back end. And even from tagging them at birth in the last sort of 4 or 5 days, there's sort of nearly no lambs. There's sort of, they really smash out at you that first 17, 18 days, and then they just taper off and stop.
What's your joining time, Matt?
Joining time is in about 2 weeks.
Yeah, so you're pretty well on the sweet spot, aren't you?
Yeah. The spring lambing,
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I don't know what I heard it quoted the other day, and again, I've got to get a better memory, but pretty much the stats are that most eggs get fertilised, don't they? It's just that some of them don't implant, so it's kind of everything. Like, the actual fertilisation is quite high. It's just the implantation that's lower. Is that right? Someone.
That's my take, right? Yep.
Is that Chris Oldham's work? Way back.
Yeah, it'd be one of those. Lindsay, Oldham, one of that WA crew. Martin, yeah.
Back when we had money for research, yep.
Short et al. In New Zealand. I can't quite remember where they're from. Down south somewhere, Ferg. I think they've been doing a fair bit of work in that space.
Oh, really?
Place lately.
Yeah, okay.
So the second cycle, you're only looking for ones that haven't implanted, and they're getting a second go. So you're actually breeding from ewes that aren't good at implanting in their first cycle. So that's why if you just did the first cycle, that'd be very cool, wouldn't it? That's very cool.
That's the theory. And some of them are going to be unlucky, but they'll also be potentially repeat offenders. And
But like you say, you got to be pretty game to do it.
And the beauty of the terminal job is you kind of, if you get you still got a trade land to deal with. You might not have many replacements, but you still got something to sell.
Just trying to bring my age of my ewes down, put it back up again.
Yeah, but like we're getting to see more and more of that. It's awesome too, because you got like your maternal lambs are all early cycle, all going together. It's like having an AI drop almost. Like,
Yeah.
Is teasing pretty essential in a short joining like
that? We've created headaches with teasing in it because, well, that time of year they should be all spontaneously ovulating, so teasing shouldn't have an impact. I don't know if anyone's seen anything differently, but teasing should be, I mean, other than for ewe hoggets or ewe lambs, it's probably, I think it'd probably cause as much grief as it would save, because if you do happen to have a teasing effect because if you get a ram effect because they haven't seen each other, you'd probably just tighten it up as long as you've got enough rams in, I suppose. All right, but we did cause a bit of grief one year where we just didn't have enough ram power in there, and they all cycled within 4 or 5 days, and didn't have enough ram power to get them. And so probably all right if you got a heap of percentage in there, but we caused a kind of 15% dry rate, and we put it down to the fact that we just had them all go early and then pulled the rams out like a couple of days too early almost. Which will put the jitters up a few people that were thinking about doing that. But so we put that down to teasing, and I might be wrong. We haven't got any other answer to it, but so I guess, I mean, most of the teasing work says they've got to be not ovulating to have the big impact, and so by now everything should be cycling.
Southie definitely doesn't tease, does he? And short, what is he, 21 days now, is he, or even less, and obviously getting huge scanning results.
Righto, if we're all silent.
No, I got one more question, Ferg.
So
if you have, so I'm just putting some troughs into a paddock with the big dam that I don't love because I think it's getting pretty shallow at the moment. Do I have to fence the dam off, or will they preferentially just go to the trough if they're not going to get bogged in it?
How deep's the dam and how much water's in the dams, I reckon, is the question.
Not very much, quite shallow.
Yeah, so I think you've answered your own question. I would fence it out.
Hey,
We've been doing a lot of that.
I'm not having to do the work, but I'd say fence it out.
Oh, you want me to fence it out? Oh, no.
Oh, yes.
I know the calves are terrible. They go and stand in it, but because the sheep, they like because they go near it because I think there's a cooling effect, cool guardy effect by sitting next to it, don't they?
Have you listened to today's podcast that you get 10 times higher toxo rate on sheep that are on dams rather than troughs?
Oh.
Pretty good reason now, I reckon.
Fine.
You had nothing on the weekend.
How does that work, Dom?
That was, I think, so obviously the toxoplasma are all obviously cat feces, and so the fact that you've got a dam that like it'll carry feces or water from feces for acres and acres and acres and so you get basically a collection of oocysts or oocysts or whatever they call them. So if you'll be laughing because it took me 10 times to say that in the podcast. And they're really bomb-proof. So they just sit in the sediments in the dam, and so when it gets stirred up, so basically one of the greatest infection sites for toxo is your dam, is what. So we had a young bloke, somebody, Connor Bury, he was released today, I think. Today. Really interesting stuff on toxo. So
that's cool to know that.
And I guess if you got a float on the top of a dam, like it's the oocysts will drop to the bottom or whatever. So if you're sucking water out of the top, you're obviously not getting as many contaminated oocysts out there, and therefore not infecting sheep so much. Like it's some real weird stat. Like cats only, anyway, I got nerded out on toxo, but like cats only shed once in their life and only shed for 14 days or something. But still, there's just squillions of them everywhere, and every farm's got some. Just
Don't
because
foxes,
of how bomb-proof they are.
Foxes have them too, mate?
No, it's only cats.
Only cats?
Yeah.
Cool.
I made that mistake on the podcast and said that too.
I lost about 75 pregnancies last year in my ewe lambs to toxo.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
They cleaned me out pretty late in the piece. It was pretty ugly, actually.
Yeah. He was saying they must be trialling a vaccine in Adelaide, so it must be like Kiwis have got a vaccine here, but which I think's made in Bendigo, which always makes me giggle a bit. But maybe I'm making that up, but I think that's true. But anyways, yeah, there is a vaccine here, but we haven't had it in Australia, obviously. But anyway, yeah, that was interesting, that surface water thing. I'd never heard that before.
No, I'd never. Yeah.
And we just assume that we all have it, yeah? It's everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, every farm they've ever tested.
It's a bit like Campylobacter. More we pregnancy tested, the more Campylobacter we found. So Whaley and Rendell reckon it's endemic. You just need the right seasons to set it off. So that's why we're pretty pushy on especially with ewe lamb joinings, on the vaccine if they've had no exposure to it before.
Righto, well, we'll hang around, but I'll just take this opportunity to firstly thank Sophie for making these things happen, which is awesome, and thanks to Amy, Tomo, and Kat for their contributions this evening, and thanks to all you for coming along and asking questions and being part of the conversation, which is the whole point of these things. We'll get those thanks out of the road. We're doing these monthly, so feel free to keep an eye out on what we're doing next. Sophie might tell us what we're doing next. I think we're doing I don't make it up, but I think we're doing a foot rot yarn with a few people. Sophie will correct me if I'm wrong, but and I think, I don't know what you think, but I think we get a lot of value out of having a few people on to sort of bounce the ideas around rather than sort of one person talking. But so we'll keep doing these once a month to keep having chats. But anyway, thanks for coming along, and we'll hang around and answer any more questions.